Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Peyton Marshall. Since 1985, Peyton Marshall has served in product management, sales, and senior management roles in a number of B2B sectors. For 12 years, he was an investment banker, most of that time at Goldman Sachs, structuring and selling complex and innovative financial solutions to global corporate and financial institution CFOs. Since 1997, he has been on the receiving end of all kinds of sales approaches, as CFO of 3 public biotech companies, CEO of 1 public biotech company, and COO of a private drug discovery company. He has been CEO and chairman of a private cloud software company since 2012. So with that, Peyton, welcome.
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks everyone for joining us. Let's start with a basic commercial question. What is your sales cycle? Some of them are a little wobblier than others. But all businesses try to measure sales cycle. And they measure them usually in days, weeks, months, and quarters. But framing the question in terms of a sales cycle really misses the fundamentals because it's really all about the buyer and the buying process. And the interesting thing about buying processes is that they aren't measured in calendar time. They're measured in events. They're measured in milestones. They're measured in moments. The ancient Greeks actually had 2 words for time, chronos or chronological time, and kairos, about event-driven time. And I know it's strange for us to think that way, but buyers tend to think in event terms and in the way that they work. Now, from all our perspectives, the most important one is when it's over, and that's a contractual commitment. But there are a lot of B2B buying events along the way. Here are a few examples. When buyers check out the website, download a resource. When they start to agree to interact with a sales team or a sales rep. As they start to ask questions about a solution, introduce people, set up a meeting. Goes a little deeper when they've got to start to pull a team together, start to get serious in terms of evaluating, because B2B teams have all kinds of ways to evaluate, whether it's pilots. Pulling that team together, though, creates a number of events or moments, and those events are realizations as well as asking questions. They begin to turn a corner when they agree, at least among themselves, that the pilot's complete, or they start to think in terms of a business case to buy. Because the end of almost all B2B processes, it gets to the nitty-gritty in terms of contract, does procurement get involved, negotiating terms. And all of those are critical events running up to a contractual commitment. So every buying process may be different, but there really are some core buying activities that are driven by those buying events. Buyers are always thinking about identifying and prioritizing. They're always juggling. They're always doing triage. But there's this more serious stage where they begin to evaluate, and they actually take the time to assemble a team and come up with some sort of evaluation process, because none of them are going to be able to jump straight from looking at a solution to deciding and purchase. They all have to make the case to spend money and how they're going to spend it. So if you think about those events that we just looked at, all of those early stage events, whether they involve an interaction with a salesperson like the red ones, or whether they're really by buyers on their own, really are taking place throughout as it relates to identifying and prioritizing. There are a number of those events that really correspond very directly to the evaluation stage, and then the decision stage has a third set of events. And it's important to use those events and to see those events to identify where you are. The aim of the sales team during a buying process is to create powerful moments. If you haven't read it, The Power of Moments, a book published by the Heath brothers last year, is a great book. And I don't typically like these kinds of books. I'll admit I had my own set of powerful moments reading it. Creating powerful B2B moments isn't easy for sales because we're in a world of informed and organized buyers. They have information online. They have playbooks. We're in a world where sellers are uncertain about what buyers are up to. And those uncertainties are sometimes political, about stakeholders. Sometimes they're about process. And sometimes those process uncertainties are not just uncertainties for sellers. The buyers don't know themselves what their process is. And finally, we have complexity. And complexity is both about technological complexity, which is a clear element, but it's also about the complexity of customization. So in light, especially of the last one, that means that there's often some specialization within sales teams, including pre-sales professionals who interact with buyers. By pre-sales, I mean a lot of different titles. And those titles vary by organization, their role varies by organization, but they all interact with buyers, and they all tend to provide in-depth product and technical knowledge in those interactions. Often they're there to customize a package or solution, and they're also there to provide solution use and implementation experience. So we're in a world where sales is now a team sport, and team means diversity in terms of skills, experiences, and temperaments. So sales teams' objectives really differ for different stages of the buying process. Early on, it's about getting through, it's about connecting, and then figuring out whether this is actually a good prospect to spend time on, while you're trying to establish a basis for evaluation that's exclusive. So differentiating early is good, but your aim isn't to get to the end zone from the beginning, it's to advance to the next stage. Because at that evaluation stage, that's when team selling comes in and begins to be important. And teams are often about introducing new people and credentializing them. And those new people need to engage as well. So while the pre-sales team may be there to customize and help prove, there are other objectives at this stage of the cycle as well. Before finally you're in the decide and purchase stage, where the objectives are drive time, stay connected, and negotiate. So what is the aim? Create powerful moments. So this may seem like a lot of chaos, but the good news is that there's some fundamental questions B2B teams ask. What impacts can they expect by buying? Is your solution better for them than the alternative? And is your solution worth the cost? Now the randomness comes in because different stakeholders often ask more than once, different stages in the process versus different alternatives, and they want different levels of rigor in their answers. So how do you deal with that? A value proposition creates core sales content to create powerful buying moments, because at its heart, a value proposition answers a fundamental question. What do we do for our customers? Value propositions turn product monologues into customer-centric conversations. Good value propositions provide clear answers to simple questions. What are the 3 things that make you better? How much better are you? And what is that worth? Because value propositions then support buyer engagement by sales teams. Let's look at value propositions through the buying process. Early on, a value proposition may have very little customization for the customer. It can start life as a flexible case study, as a way to be customer-centric. So that at that point, a flexible case study helps sales and a sales rep connect, qualify, differentiate, and move on. In the middle of the sales cycle, it may go deeper. It may be more about customization. It may be more about digging in on the sales side, but that's actually the point where often pre-sales members of the team are involved, where the objectives really are get them into the process as they look to customize solutions and help the rep prove out the points. So that going into a decide and purchase stage, there can actually be an agreed shared business case that a buyer sponsor is bought into, because that helps drive the time to close, it helps stay connected, and it actually helps in the negotiation. So everyone says they need a value proposition, but value props mean different things to different people. Sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a verbal or bullet point summary, sometimes it's math. Good value propositions are better than a spreadsheet, and they shouldn't require value engineers. Good value propositions should provide options to keep conversations simple and direct, because in any given conversation, there's no need to go deeper than a customer needs to go. So we think of value propositions as having layers. 3 layers of value: qualitative, how our solution is better; quantitative, our solution is better by 35%; and financial, we can generate this many dollars or this many euros for you a year. But impactful moments are not just analytical or rational. The Heath brothers highlight that they're moments of elevation, breaking the script. They're moments of insight, where sometimes you're tripping over what should be in front of you. They can be moments of pride, and not just self-centered pride, but actually recognition of others and moments of courage. And they're moments of connection, creating some shared connections and deepening the ties. So we're going to look at each stage in a little more detail. And we're going to start with early in the sales cycle with the identify and prioritize stage, and look at a flexible case study. Because at that stage, it's very important to bring in value. A survey of buyer executives found that 3/4 of them award business and competition to the first vendor who delivers a vision of value. So let's look at an example of a value prop at that stage. There are a lot of things you can think of as you go into an early conversation, but a lot of this is verbal. A lot of this is identifying pain points, trying to reframe a problem, words of the challenger sale, helping to understand and have shared context so that you can set up a good solution. But what's important in setting up that solution is to have concrete examples of how that solution's worked for others, because that's where you really begin to build a connection. So case studies and case studies presented are a great thing. Flexible case studies, though, are even better, because they can start as a conversation as how you delivered results for someone else, but they can begin to begin to be modified. And so as I modify them, as I hear what they're about, I begin to discover things. And I begin to learn perhaps something about their size and something about their parameters. So that as this value proposition changes, and I should have had a better title here, but I'll do that. As this value proposition begins to change, it turns from a flexible case study into some information about this customer. Now, you needn't do that at all, but doing this early starts to set up a conversation later, because you also may want to identify which of your benefits matter, and you may find yourself in a situation where you need to be able to talk ROI just to get to the next stage. So let's go back and think about what you did. A survey of buyer executives found that 22% of vendor sales reps understand buyer problems, and only 12% of sales calls add value. Flexible case studies help sales connect. And they do that by beginning to identify that you understand the buyer's problems, that you understand the buyer's business. They do that also, though, by helping sales reps begin to prepare for a call and understand the buyer a bit better. And by being better prepared, we all know that begins to build trust, that begins to build a relationship early in the sales cycle. Finally, what a value proposition does and a case study does is it gets very directly to what do you do for the customer. And that means the elevator pitch is better prepared because you never know when you're going to connect with a senior executive. And value propositions help sales reps get to the point. We deliver a 35% improvements in energy efficiency. For a customer like you, it might be worth $20 million in annual savings. Second, qualify. Flexible case studies prompt good questions. They prompt customer-centric questions like, is this a problem for you? Or have you considered ways to address it? They can also prompt customer-specific questions. Do you know what you spend? How many sales reps do you have? They begin to get to issues about the relevance of your solution and your messages because a case study starts to then provide a connection to what might a buyer's goals be this year? If you've provided something for someone else, does that matter to them? What are their hurdle rates in making a change? And finally, you can start to learn something about the organization. How do they make decisions? Who should you talk to? So qualification then provides questions that provide customer insights. Do the problems that you solve actually resonate? Have you figured out what matters to this particular stakeholder? Is this an opportunity suited to your solution? So value propositions help qualify opportunities. Third, differentiate. Establish better business outcomes. Value propositions by their nature focus on differentiation. And that's important because at this stage, the customer is, and a prospect is just trying to think about why change. So outcomes for customers help differentiate you. They help provide differentiation just that you're customer-centric, but more importantly, that there are outcomes for them. Flexible case studies help you get to why change now, because one of the biggest problems at this stage is getting people beyond the no decision alternative. And finally, they help early positioning for differentiation. Differentiating early helps because if you can avoid introducing a competitor into the evaluation stage, that's great. The end point here is to advance. And some of that's about identifying the right person. Value propositions help you figure out what matters to whom. And more importantly, as you get the right people involved, that helps stage the right meeting. But value propositions and flexible case studies also answer the question, why go deeper? The aim here is not to prove, it's to induce and invite the customer to evaluate. So early in the sales cycle, value props provide powerful buyer moments. Customers realizing they have a problem or that maybe there's a solution. They provide connection. This rep actually gets my business. They potentially provide elevation, the potential for a payoff or victory lap might be in sight. And then there's the recognition and pride. This could be career enhancing. I'll take this to my boss. Some courage. So with that said, at the beginning of the sales cycle, let's now turn to the middle of the sales cycle, where it's all about evaluation. And at this stage, value propositions begin to be more and more customized because this is also at the stage where the buyer is digging in. And it's the stage where you've got a buyer team and you've got a seller team. So let's look at that evaluation phase, because it's time for quantitative and financial value. Over 90% of buyer executives say they get their finance team involved in evaluating purchases. I'll guarantee you that's a financial assessment. 6.8 is the average number of people on a buying team in a survey last year. So this is definitely selling to a committee. And Serious Decisions has identified that the #1 problem for sales effectiveness is an inability to convey a value proposition. But it's also time for sales teamwork. And studies increasingly highlight the benefits of teamwork in terms of conversion rates, revenue, sales speed. A recent survey by Gong found that more than one participant, just statistically, increases the probability of closing by 2 to 3x. So that increasingly the direction of sales organizations is to have up to half of their headcount as specialists who are able to talk to customers. During a buyer evaluation, a value proposition can take on a pretty different form. And that's a form that lets you go deeper. So let's look at some examples of that. And we'll stick with the same value proposition, where, again, you may be trying to identify what matters or what doesn't. And you may be doing that in a committee or with individual stakeholders. So starting to be selective, as you're thinking about the specifics of this customer. And even drilling down, do you have the support that you need here? That kind of white paper that lets you get into the detail. Or drilling down in terms of individual value drivers. Here we've got a product that generates higher business productivity based on some data. But one of the things we may want to do in proving that out is customize some of the assumptions. But one of the things we may also want to do is look at the sensitivity to assumptions. So perhaps I want to use more conservative assumptions as I think about that value driver. All of which may be designed at this stage in the sales cycle to get through to a final answer that may not show a price at all, that may really be focused fundamentally on the value created. And so as we do that, we're building that value proposition. We're setting this up as a case that this customer can buy into. So what are we actually doing when we do that? First, there is this problem of you're introducing new members of your team, and early credibility matters. And that early credibility may come as you're still considering presenting the case study. Because when you bring pre-sales in, that can be a more in-depth exposure to actual other customers in the business case. So case studies, even at this stage, help your team show that they have the experience. And your team can show that they understand the buyer's problem. Because where you're really trying to get at this stage is credibility that your team can deliver results. Second, you're trying to engage. And at one level, that engagement can happen at call prep. Value propositions help organize teams around their call prep. If a rep has introduced a value proposition early, then it becomes a natural way for teams to get ready for the situation. But even if they haven't, starting to think about this customer's specifics helps that team get ready to frame the conversation as to the suitability of your solution for the customer. What can be just as important here, though, is that pre-sales people love their products. And a lot of pre-sales people are pretty smart, geeky, wonky types, so their social skills aren't necessarily well developed. Value propositions are a good way to keep pulling pre-sales back to being customer-centric in presentations. It's not about features and product features. It's about what you do for the customer. And moving pre-sales to identifying what resonates or not is really important. The best pre-sales people are also really good in these meetings at getting reaction. So having sample or representative numbers to get at how you create value can often invite that reaction in a meeting. You begin to discover more about that customer more naturally. Now, that doesn't mean that meetings need to descend into detailed spreadsheet analyses. In fact, showing the value proposition and answering a few questions is a good way to sort of steer a meeting to create some instant credibility, but leave some of the detailed follow-up to later. And if you got somebody asking a lot of questions over in the corner, that's a good thing to do. So value props improve meeting management, and they begin to do that all-important thing for the best pre-sales people, which is begin to establish a trusted advisory relationship. So engagement is all important at this stage. Third, customization. And specificity is really one way to avoid commoditization, where specificity really has two dimensions. The first is, do you actually understand the customer? Do you have specific business knowledge? Have you really understood how your solution fits into their business? The second element, though, is the more commonly thought of when you hear the word customization, which is, are you customizing solutions? And more businesses have many ways to customize, whether it's as simple as gold, silver, bronze, or it's more complex configurations. Because the ultimate end is both to understand the customer well enough and to customize the solution so that you have a good fit. A Forrester survey of buyers found that 72% base their decision to buy on the fit for a specific need at a specific time. The number one reason for a B2B purchase. So customizing the content, customizing the solution helps drive the best fit. Finally, let's look at what's on the buyer's mind. The factors that play the greatest role in decision making. What do they care about? In a survey from Aberdeen PGA last year, they found that of the top two factors, 45% said total cost of ownership, financial value. 42% said, how does the vendor support my goals? A very qualitative, but very definitely a set of value proposition content. And 40% said efficiency gains, ROI, or quantitative and financial impact. So value propositions matter to the buyer. And having persuasive evidence of business outcomes is essential. The thing about that evidence is it's not mathematical proof. Rigor is not required. It's about persuasive support, that you deliver business results, that you satisfy buyers' challenges, and that you're able to refine a few assumptions that the buyer sees as relevant. It's not about getting all the exact data. It's about being responsive enough to earn the buyer's trust. So let's look at proof in light of a value proposition. And the first level is this evidence of differentiation. You really want to bring that home at this stage. And one way to do that is supporting studies and documents. To the extent you have them, use them, make them available. But if you don't have them, plausibility and sensitivity to assumptions can be just as powerful a way to persuade and show people that you understand them and that based on, for example, conservative assumptions, you deliver value. Because what this is really about then is demonstrating that your solution will deliver business outcomes and providing decent support for that. That support really is all then about confidence. And it's about confidence that your solution is worth the money. So powerful evaluation moments in the middle of the sales cycle, connection. Your team knows what it's doing. The buyer realizes that. Your team's asking great questions, and the buyer understands that your team is making connections. Insight. Buyers learning new things. They hadn't thought of this. Having the insight really and having the aha moment that this fits us. Recognition. Buyers actually like to understand that they're working with a team that has the answers as they build their own courage that they should make a change. And finally, elevation. Upside, and that you're differentiated, that they're seeing that this is the team that I want to work with. So now we go to the closing stages. And what's interesting is in a broader world, a lot of people would say, this is the place you use value propositions. As I hope some of the earlier suggestions illustrate, bringing it in now is probably okay, but starting that conversation earlier is even better. Because later in the sales cycle, uncertainties get magnified. Those are uncertainties about what's actually possible at the customer and whether there's somebody who's actually behind you. Sometimes they're political and process uncertainties. Who needs to review it? Who needs to sign off? Are they actually there? Sometimes it's about resolving how do they actually get underway? And then often it's the great black hole of what's actually going on at procurement. And with all those uncertainties, what happens later in the sales cycle is time starts to stand still. So let's look at a value proposition late in the sales cycle. And that value proposition can include earlier content. It can include what we've decided we're really going to focus on. But what's useful and all important is then to get to a bottom line, to prove out that we actually deliver net benefits, or that when you think about our sources of value, there's very significant value net of the price. Because we know this is often the stage where you may need to get into talking about providing different pricing or different solutions. And in doing that, having a tool to think about, and based on what you already know about the customer, to start to think about how you might change the structure of a contractor relationship, how you might, provide a different package or different pricing. All of that provided in the context of value delivered then provides a good basis to go back and provide good feedback and speed up closing. So let's look at that in a little more detail. The first objective here is driving time to close. Steve Jobs, customers don't care how hard you work, they measure you on what you deliver. A value proposition is about what you deliver. And a value proposition itself can become the endpoint for an evaluation. It can become this shared business case to buy and a case to move forward with a sponsor. Because that shared business case to buy then helps speed the documentation and the finalization. And it's all important to realize that a value proposition in setting expectations helps to speed the process. It helps internally in those conversations where sales isn't involved at a buyer to understand what's actually involved with a solution. Because the trusted advisory relationship at this point then becomes a basis for alignment. And that alignment is part of how the internal process of the buyer moves forward faster. What's just as important at this stage is to connect with the purchasing process, because proposals can tend to get complicated. Buyers go through those proposals and they rapidly come back. And teams are able to respond more rapidly if they have a shared business case to buy and they have an understanding of the value they create. So moving rapidly helps stay connected. Competing with other priorities. It's funny how early stage questions come up at the end of a sales cycle. And as they come up, then a shared business case becomes a basis to stay engaged. As a sponsor comes back and said, I got a question, can you help me answer it? That value proposition becomes part of the basis to stay involved. Because the shared business case to buy ultimately is there to sustain your sponsor's confidence. It's not just about your sales pitch. It's really about your sponsor's confidence to get something adopted internally and to move a purchase through a process. So finally, negotiations. Warren Buffett, as usual, said it very clearly. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. So it's natural at the closing stage, and it's a good thing to redirect price discussions toward value. Recent book that Todd Snellgrove and Andreas Hinterhuber put out has a great title, Price First, Then Value. And redirecting price discussions toward value is a good way to handle a lot of questions in a negotiation. But there are uncertainties, and buyers create uncertainties at this stage. It's funny how they introduce a new competitor at the last minute. So a value proposition and a shared business case to buy becomes a good basis to ask questions where you discover where you stand. Third, there's the natural back and forth, where using value to structure proposals and counters becomes very productive. You know, fundamentally, this is a stage where buyers are going to ask for price concessions. And to be able to demonstrate very quickly that you get what you pay for is way better than caving on a simple demand for a price cut. Because the best deals are partnerships. They're about win-win. And establishing the basis for those partnerships as a sharing arrangement early on is important. Finally, this is about sales team confidence. And a value proposition, a shared business case to buy, can give sales confidence as they get to the fundamental questions and the hard questions of do they hold in there with one price, or do they think about concessions? So sales team confidence is very directly about price realization. So in closing moments, value propositions make them powerful. It's about recognition. We need to get this done and having the courage. The solution's worth the price. It's about staying connected, keeping involved with the sponsor in answering questions, staying involved with the sponsor in terms of the buying process. It's about insights. As buying teams go, okay, well, we have the budget. They're holding in there. We'll get what we pay for. And finally, it's about those features of elevation that are actually about, yeah, we're making the right decision. This is the right vendor to go with. So let's get started. In sum, the data show that value propositions deliver results. Leverage point customers using value propositions find that when they're used, there's a higher closing rate, and they're finding this from their CRMs, of 5 to 15%. And they're realizing higher prices, depending on their vertical, of 5 to 25%. The reality is great B2B enterprises no longer sell product features. They deliver business outcomes. Value propositions create moments when buyers realize those outcomes. If you can't explain it simply, You don't understand it well enough. Value propositions support clear, consistent collaboration between sales teams and buying teams. So thanks. Taylor?
Great. Thank you so much, Peyton, for sharing those insights. And we've had a couple questions come in during the webinar, but there is still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete that 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of Value Propositions for B2B Sales Team Effectiveness and be entered into that raffle, giving away 3 free copies of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. We really appreciate your interest in Leverage Point, so if you'd like to learn more or be entered into a raffle to transition one of your case studies into a personalized value proposition, please check the appropriate boxes in that exit survey. All right, so let's get started on Q&A. To answer the most popular question myself, yes, this webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. To get us started, let's review the results of our value selling survey. This was a survey passed around our webinar audience right before this session to see what some prevailing views on value selling are. We do plan to do a more extensive value strategy survey to a broader base of interested parties with published results later in the year, so be on the lookout for that. But for the first question we asked, what % of your sales force sells on value? It was a fairly even split, with 22% of respondents answering less than 10%, 26% saying 10 to 40%, 30% indicating 40 to 80%, and 22% claiming greater than 80%. This just shows the varying stages B2B organizations are in their value journey. For the second question, we asked, how do your current value sellers tend to communicate value? Please check all that apply. The results here are pretty expected, with the majority of value sellers using typical qualitative messaging, but only about half discussing quantitative impact data, and even fewer using financial comparisons and ROI to communicate their value to prospects. I think this begs the question, and Peyton, I'd love your input on this one. Why is qualitative messaging used more than quantitative and financial?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, especially in light of the audience, because I think we have a very pro-value audience for this particular survey. But as you look at this, you know, one reason that you could be seeing a lot more qualitative and less financial is just content generation. It's easier for product teams to generate qualitative messages than quantitative and financial comparisons. But often sales teams manage to generate their own. And so what also becomes interesting and important is the second issue, which is content availability. Is it actually there when sales needs it? And that can be one reason that there's heavier reliance on qualitative messaging. The third reason really may well be sales leadership. And what I think we see is that sales leaders talking value, the C-suite talking value, best practices really being constantly brought up internally starts to really drive greater use of value financially and quantitative in the sales process.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So moving on to question 3, here we asked, where in the sales cycle should you start communicating value? And it's like you all watched Peyton's webinar before it happened, with a resounding 80% hitting the nail on the head, answering early. Remember, Forrester Research states the first vendor to succeed in communicating a vision to value wins the business 74% of the time. So don't wait, start the value conversation right away. Question number 4 asks, what % of your sales team talks financial value, ROI, TCO, economic value? Over 70% of you indicated that less than half of your sales team is discussing financial value. Peyton, what do you think is going on here?
So it's interesting, especially given a very pro-value audience that we have that going on. You know, I think there's some important elements. The best sales reps actually gravitate toward doing this. As I said earlier, often we find that sales has been, and individuals in sales have been talking value well before product management started providing them with the tools. So this can often be about driving a broader adoption and driving best practices into a sales force. And to do that, sales leaders really need to get engaged. They need to mobilize, they need to have internal drivers, and they need to talk success. That's really the best way to make value selling go viral. They need to get people past their fears. So showing real examples and promoting them is all important.
Great. And the final question asked, should you restrict value conversations to specialists like solution consultants, subject matter experts, value engineers, etc.? This was definitely the trickiest one. Peyton, what do you think about the answers on this one?
So again, I think it's specific to a very pro-value audience. We got a lot of no outright. We did get the driver's ed answer. So the second most popular answer, 21% with inexperienced salespeople. I think that's pretty natural to think of less experienced people probably need to spend some time on the passenger side, really just to get comfortable and get used to it before they begin to do it. So I view this as a fairly pro-value culture and pro-early in the sales cycle kind of answer. I think if we'd taken a broader audience, a less pro-value audience, and we had to look to get that in our survey in the fall, but that yes of 11%, I think in the broader community, there's a much greater prevailing notion that you really need to keep this confined to your specialists. That value selling is something for value engineers or maybe for pre-sales people. So we don't think that's the case, and we think the best organizations make this broad.
Yeah, absolutely. Something definitely to look forward to in that fall survey. Okay, cool. So let's move to some questions from the audience here. First one for you, Peyton. What's your recommendation for companies that have absolutely no idea how to buy value?
How to buy value?
Yes.
So I think that's suggesting that the buyer universe your sales teams face, if I've understood the question, that potentially your target customers don't understand how to buy value. If that's this question, and the question seems a little ambiguous, so I'll answer it this way to start. Don't be naive. Someone at your buyer is, or at least at some percentage of your buyers, is asking people internally for a justification. So if this is about, do buyers actually think about value? They do. And I think that that one survey I mentioned in the middle of the sales cycle, part of the conversation about financial people being involved in purchasing proves that out. If this is a question about your sales team not understanding value, you'd be surprised. First, your experienced sales reps understand their own buyers, and if they've been actively involved in their buyers, your best reps actually understand how they work politically. So finding those sales reps who understand your buyers better, I think will help you identify that yes, it matters to buyers. The second thing is, can sellers succeed? And this is where having a really good, what I'll think of as a sales pilot, is a way to really demonstrate and override the objections. And one of the best ways to do that is engage a sales leader, pick a mobilizer who's really going to drive value for an important value proposition, pick a small team of reps, identify opportunities, and then track those opportunities to get results. And so ultimately, getting successful results from some kind of sales pilot program is then a very good way to both refine the content of the value proposition and then drive it to a broader sales community.
Yeah, and we have an additional comment just on this question in general, and I'd be interested to see your reaction to it. If the customer or buyer doesn't see the value, it's the wrong contact.
Absolutely, that is such a good comment. You know, it's really getting to the question of how value helps you qualify. And if they're not seeing the value, then maybe this is bad account to be pursuing. And the other thing I'll say is, if the buyer's not seeing the value and you're way into an evaluation phase, you've probably wasted a lot of time of your own team's pre-sales expertise, and that's expensive time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So this is a two-part one, so I'm just going to give you the first one first, and then we can follow up. How do you move a traditional company that's focused on revenue and net profit to this approach, to a value approach?
Yeah, so there's so many dimensions to that question. Certainly, there's a sales compensation dimension, which is that sales incentives have, may not have been set up so that sales is incentivized towards profitable transactions. So I think that's clearly one element from your own perspective. But then the second element is really getting everyone in the mentality of their customer. What value is about at its fundamental level is simpler than quantitative value. It's about being customer-centric. And it's about being customer-centric not in terms of your product features, but in terms of their outcomes. So everyone talking value is a great way forward. The best thing that can happen is when your CEO is interviewed by Wall Street and it's captured on tape, that CEO needs to have an elevator pitch for how your latest product or your product in launch is delivering value for your customers. Having that as a tape to play at a rollout is huge. The second thing is having that evidence of success and celebrating that success with war stories and publicity is a way to make early success among some reps and some teams go viral.
Mm-hmm. And the follow-up to it is which systems would support this change if their KPIs award short-term financial results?
Which systems
would support this change if their KPIs award short-term financial results?
I'm not sure what the system in question is, and that those may be, those could be anything from selling systems. So I'll start there. If you look at the best B2B sales trainers right now, virtually every one of them is talking and suggesting that being customer-centric and talking value propositions matter, right? And so on the sales system side, I think it's clearly the case that everyone from Challenger to Serious Decisions to Miller Hyman to Richardson, that they're all on board with that. Which systems support this? I think it kind of comes back to a culture. And so the other sort of system that's supportive here really comes to an internal culture that's focused on value and is therefore customer-centric instead of being technical-centric.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. It looks like there's only one other question, and this one's more of a logistical question. Is there a discussion board or forum for the book Dollarizing Differentiation Value? As far as I know, no, but all of that information on Dollarizing Differentiation Value, any books and all content is all available on Stefan's website, and I highly recommend checking it out. It's stefanliozu.com. That's STEPHANLIOZU.com. So check it out there. And you can also buy it on Amazon if you don't happen to win it in our raffle. But it looks like that is all we've got for today. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email us at the emails on this screen. We'll be happy to answer anything you have. And just before you go, a brief reminder that next month we are bringing back Todd Snellgrove to follow up on his last webinar with Realizing and Delivering on Your Value Promise. Drive organizational change to ingrain value in your culture. If you're interested in registering for this webinar, please check the appropriate box in the exit survey. All right, that is it from us for today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Peyton for your insights. From all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.